Great. You want to kick things off, Mike?
3, 2, 1. That way it connects. What's up, everybody? Exercise is Medicine, podcast number 7. Our guest here today is a friend, a colleague, someone who I've known before I got my PhD, someone who I've known before I've come to Drexel, and someone who we have the pleasure of speaking with here today. Dr. Christen Mendonca is going to talk to us a little bit about his path and his trajectory into exercise. And we hope to have a robust discussion about some of the research he's doing and talk a little about his career trajectory, how he got to where he is today. But without further ado, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself to members of the audience and maybe tell a little about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to my home in Birmingham, Alabama. My name is Christen Mendonca, and I'm a postdoctoral scholar with the University of Alabama at Birmingham. But I'm part of a special collaborative that is a offsite research team that works with the Lakeshore Foundation, which is a Paralympic and Olympic training site, as well as a fitness center that's inclusive of people with disabilities.
Very cool. I remember, Chris, we met, we actually lived in the same apartment complex.
We were neighbors. We lived by accident.
Right? It was like,
yeah.
I remember I mentioning to you when the pandemic started. So Chris, I met Chris, so he lived in the courtyard level of our apartment, and I would go downstairs and work out during the pandemic, just somewhere outside. And, we got to talking, and then I told him, yeah, I'm minoring in exercise science. He goes, oh yeah, I'm getting my PhD then. So, small world, right?
Yeah, it was like, who is this guy? I just heard the noise because I was still writing my dissertation. We were all working from home. So I was like, what is this noise I keep hearing? I looked out and I started working out.
So you met the first time is
yeah.
sort of serendipitously in your apartment complex, and then and you found out that, hey, we're both students at Drexel, and wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Really cool.
Interesting.
Small
Interesting. Very cool. So Chris, a couple of things that I'd really like to talk with you a little about is part of what we do on this podcast is really provide members of the Drexel community with information and resources to lower barriers so they can become more physically active, they can engage in more lifestyle health and wellness programs, both offered within the university and maybe beyond the university. Can you talk a little bit about your story and your trajectory of how, you ended up as a postdoc and ultimately why you chose to pursue your PhD in physical therapy, rehab sciences, with focus in exercise, I think exergaming, right? Would you say it's rooted in exergaming? So can you talk a little bit about your trajectory? I think it'd be really good to hear for members of our audience.
Sure. So I clearly don't have a very clean or linear path through this journey. I started as an athletic training major in Massachusetts, a small state school, Bridgewater. And I just wasn't very good at it. And I wasn't being honest with myself about not really being great at it. And at the time, my thinking as a young man, I work out a lot, I exercise a lot. If I switch to exercise science, it will be easy, right? And turns out it was not. It was actually a lot harder, but luckily I was better at it and it made me want to work harder. And so when I made the switch to exercise, it really was a whole new world. And so at that point I was hooked. And, as my journey went on, I thought about going in different paths, like maybe veering off into business or something else. And I just kept coming back to exercise. And so once I was finished with my undergraduate degree, I rolled right into a master's degree. And that went fairly well. I had to take a break in the middle, but it took me about 4 years to finally finish all the requirements for my master's. And then throughout those 2 degrees, I was also supporting myself and paying for school by personal training. And so early on, I was certified through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Got their certified strength and conditioning specialist. Yeah. And there was actually a lot of opportunities. Massachusetts was very good for personal training and strength and conditioning. There was a lot of opportunities and I was able to do quite well. And throughout that time, through a mutual fitness contact, I found out about an occupational school that was looking for an instructor. And so I did my master's internship there. And within a couple of years, I had become the director of that small school. And I thought that was it, because I had flirted with the idea of getting a PhD, but the school had made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. And so I started teaching and leading that occupational school for a number of years. And I just started to get the thought of getting a PhD just kept coming back to me. And I was working alongside with Christen Mendonca, who you know, Dr. Willett. And she ended up telling me one day that she was leaving and going for a PhD. And I was so jealous. I was so happy for her, but at the same time, I was jealous. And I thought, I should do that. I thought about doing that as well. And so I credit her with really giving me the kick again to start thinking about it. Because about 6 years had gone by. I was teaching for about 5 or 6 years. And when she left to go to the University of Utah, I thought, well, that's it. Now I've got to see if I can keep pace. And so I started looking around, and I had this idea that I wanted to start to focus on people with disabilities, and especially physical disabilities that led to mobility limitation. So I myself have a physical disability, and I had been in fitness, and ironically, I hadn't really had much interaction with adapted sports. I hadn't had much interaction with clients that had a disability, although I had worked with some injured athletes. No real focus on that. And so I started to look into how I could do this. And so I started to apply to a lot of schools, and there wasn't a whole lot of interest at the PhD level to take on a student that wanted to focus on exercise for individuals with a disability. Now, at this point, I should probably clarify, I was also looking to do performance exercise, because typically the stigma still is, if you talk about exercise and disability, people automatically think rehab and physical therapy. And that really wasn't what I was looking to do. I was looking to apply what I was already doing in strength and conditioning in a performance sense to individuals with disabilities, athlete, non-athlete, didn't matter, but I wanted to focus on that. And so it took some time. I had interviewed with a few schools, and it just didn't really seem like a good match. And then Drexel wasn't really on my radar because they didn't have an exercise science PhD. But as I started to look into what the faculty were doing in the rehab department, I thought, well, maybe there's a chance there. Even though I don't want to do exercise for rehab purposes, the topics that they were into and the things that they were doing, especially like exergaming at the time, there was an exergaming study going on for children with cerebral palsy. And so I decided to give it a shot, and it worked out. And the next thing I knew, I had moved to Philadelphia. I had never even been to Philadelphia before. I just packed up and went there. And then while I was there, I was part of the School of Nursing and Health Professions, which I believe you both are in, right?
Yes.
And as part of the rehab department, but I also, interestingly enough, had 2 mentors. And so I had one mentor who was in rehab, but I also had another mentor who was an exercise physiologist himself. And so I kind of had the best of both worlds, honestly. They really were receptive to what I wanted to do. They knew that I wasn't looking to they knew when I was looking at working with people with a physical disability, they understood that it wasn't to make them less disabled or more normal. It was to apply real exercise physiology and strength and conditioning to them. And so the path kind of went from there. And I was going to ACSM's annual meeting I think I went every year as part of my PhD. And one year I saw an individual discussing the Lakeshore Foundation and all the things that they do for adapted athletes. And I thought, I'm sitting there in the audience going, that'd be a great place for me to go and play some sports and to learn more about adapted athletics, because I didn't have a whole lot of exposure. Before that, I had done some mono skiing, and I had done some adaptive climbing and some adaptive rowing, but those are like adventure sports. I didn't have any exposure to team sports, basketball, football, rugby, any of those. And so when I saw that, it clicked, maybe that's a good place I could go. But at the time I was thinking that'd be a good place to go visit and to learn at, maybe do like a small, 1 month stay to get an idea of what they do. The very next year I was presenting a poster on my exergaming study that I was doing. And it turns out a couple of faculty were walking by and said, do you know such and such? She's also doing something almost exactly the same. And so they said, we have to introduce you. So they walked me over, and I met Dr. Lori Malone. And sure enough, she was almost doing the same project, different perspective. So what I was doing was adapting sedentary video games to be exercise. She was trying to adapt exercise video games for people with a disability. And so it was the same vein, but it was two different projects. And we got to talking and we hit it off. And, she had said, why don't you come down and visit sometime? Maybe we can collaborate. And so then it clicked that not only was this the place I saw a year earlier that I wanted to train at, but now they're also doing the same type of research that I'm interested in. And so from that point on, I basically stalked them for a few years. So because of the pandemic, it took me a couple of years to finish, but I was sending them emails regularly. What are you working on? Can I collaborate with you? And they were very open to it. And then the next thing I know, again, by accident, I Googled the wrong thing to learn more about UAB. And I stumbled upon their postdoc page, and they had a postdoc position for the research team I wanted. And the woman, Dr. Malone, didn't realize they had opened it up because she was working remote. So everybody on the team had been working remote for like 8 months to a year. She had no idea that they even opened a postdoc. And so it just went from there. I said, hey, I'm going to apply for this. And pretty much the day after I defended my dissertation defense, they had invited me to come down, and they said, we need you in a few weeks. Can you make it? And so I picked up and moved really fast. And now I'm part of, I should specify that within this collaborative, I'm on a special team called RecTech, which is funded by Department of Health and Human Services. So it's an agency called NIDLR. If any of the faculty from rehab are listening, they'll know NIDLR, but for other folks, it's the National Institute on Disability and Rehab. And so what we have is a recreational grant. It's called an RERC. And so all of their projects are that for an RERC, what you do is you do development and research projects. And it's a combination of engineering and exercise research with a focus on individuals with disabilities, improving their lives somehow, whether that's increasing opportunities to exercise, enhancing opportunities to exercise, so on and so forth. But again, it's a recreational thing. So it's not necessarily focused on reducing their disability, but it could be something like mitigating secondary effects due to their disability or sitting or so on.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity recently to work with Dr. Margaret Finley, whom I know you know, in the department, and we've collaborated as the exercise physiologist on a couple of grants that we're collaborating with. One colleague is at Virginia Commonwealth University, and so I'll admit I am definitely not an expert in the population of people who live with physical disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gaining some experience in that area, and so it'd be really interesting to as I continue to grow in that space and evolve as a researcher in that area. But I'll tell you, it's I never knew that story. I never knew that trajectory until you very nicely outlined it, Chris. And
yeah. And Dr. Finley was very helpful. She was, I think she was actually my first professor at Drexel for my PhD. And so she was the first one to expose me to NIDLR and those different funding agencies. And she's also involved quite a bit in adapted sports as well, right? As far as I know.
That's what we're working on now. It's not sports. We're working on a paradigm where we're doing virtual reality. Mm-hmm. We're trying to make virtual reality we're working with people in VR to develop modules. So that way somebody who, that lives and has even some functional ability, right? They can put the VR headset on and it takes them through like boxing or some other type of activity. Still sort of in its development stage. We're working through, we've been having meetings on that, but I'm really learning a lot about ways that we can use like metabolic equations and calculate METs, and using the space helmet that from Dr. Volpe's lab when she was here. Doing RMR type stuff to calculate that, and what's a normative VO2 max data, in terms of, is it closer to 3.5, 2.5? So it's really been an evolutionary process, and I've really enjoyed it. One thing, there's several things along your timeline in that I really liked and would like to hear your perspective on.
Sure.
And I think a couple of things. One that I think is really, really important is that you supported yourself at every level as a personal trainer. So there's going to be some students, we're developing an exercise science major. It's going through the approval process at the university level. And, you know, can you talk a little bit about like how you knew that personal training was going to be a good avenue as opposed to, you know, working at a restaurant, or, you know, what was it about personal training that really was attractive to you, and you know, and said, you know what, I could support myself with that while I'm pursuing other avenues. And I think that's really important. So you talk a little bit about that.
I wish I had an answer that made me sound really cool, but the truth is I didn't know it was going to be as good as it was. And so, you know, even when you say like, you know, versus restaurant work or something like that, there are certain occupations that I knew were not in my wheelhouse. So I'm in very good shape. I take care of myself. I can get around. I'm highly mobile. But there are certain jobs that I was just not going to be able to do that a lot of my, you know, classmates were doing at the time. So we were all like really young individuals. It seemed like it was a lot of restaurant work or construction or things like that. And so a lot of that was off the table for me. And so as I tried to find a way to support myself, especially as my undergrad went on, and especially during my master's, because then I was on my own, I just started to do whatever I could to get opportunities. And so one of the really fortunate things that happened was they had named Bridgewater State a site to take the CSCS exams. For all the young people listening, we used to have to take that by paper and pen with a VHS tape to do the practical part of the test. And so I did it, and I was probably, I mean, I must have been 19 or 20, and no, because you have to have the degree. So I was probably 21. And I took the test and I passed it. And then I just thought, well, okay, I have this credential. How can I use it? And so I just started to see what was out there. Even to the point where a funny story is I also had to have orthopedic surgery at Children's Hospital when I was 23. And I was looking for more opportunities. And my surgeon is actually a pretty famous surgeon, Dr. Lyle McKaylee at Boston Children's Hospital. And he actually owns his own, well, he doesn't own it. He's the head of a sports clinic now. I think they have a campus in Waltham as well. Really beautiful building, kind of like a smaller version of Lakeshore. So what we have at Lakeshore Foundation, it's kind of along the same lines. Anyway, I'm getting off the point. So yeah, I had surgery with him, and I'm in the hospital, and I wake up and he's there and he's talking to me, and I said, hey, can you help me get like an internship at some sports training company? Because I knew he knew a lot of them. And he said, I'll leave you a note. And sure enough, like I didn't see him again until I had a checkup months later, but I was in the hospital for about 3 days. But when I actually came to, he had left me a note by my bedside and gave me some contacts. And so I started to work with a couple of people out in Massachusetts doing some training clinics for sports teams. Another good initial employer of mine was YMCA. YMCA was very receptive to have. I mean, the elephant in the room is that I was applying for fitness jobs, and you know, I'm showing up with crutches, and you know, you get some strange looks, but I actually found that a lot of people were receptive to it. You know, I get that question now, how did you ever get accepted? But at the time, I really just wasn't even thinking about it. And I thought if I, you know, when it would dawn on me, I would just say, well, the more I think about it, the more nervous I'm going to get. So I'm just going to try to put it out of my mind. And it just ended up working out. Where it really started to take off is I started to work for a company in Massachusetts called Fitness Together, who was also very good to me. But that's kind of a different atmosphere. They have private personal training studios. And so it was one of those places where you have to have an appointment to go. It's akin to a physical therapy clinic, but it's for fitness instead of rehab. And then I worked with them for a number of years too. They were very good to me, very accepting too. It wasn't really like, yeah, I didn't feel like I had to jump through extra hurdles or anything to prove myself. It just kind of panned out. But I'll tell you that I really didn't foresee that it was going to be successful. It was the route I decided to take, and I committed myself to it. So.
Very cool. Nick?
Yeah, amazing. Wow. Amazing journey. I think that's incredible. Really everything about it.
Yeah, but it's real. I think that, you know, I think there's a lot to be said there. There wasn't anything special. It was just, I did a lot of it, and it was consistent. And, you know, I tried to get as good as I could in order to put the best product forward, and it worked out. So I don't think there's anything too remarkable about it other than I just did it. And I think that's an important thing for people to hear who don't feel very remarkable because I didn't at the time.
Yeah. Sounds like there's something in the water in Massachusetts. Everyone's coming out with a PhD
I
in
know.
exercise science.
Well, it is very fitness conscious and you have
all the
some really
best
good
people.
schools.
I'm at a disadvantage from Philly.
No, Massachusetts is great. I mean, a lot of it was, so one of the people that Chris was nice enough to refer to was Christen Mendonca. And Kristen, when I was doing my PhD at Springfield College, she was an assistant professor, right? So she had finished at the University of Utah and was hired as a new faculty member. And I got to know her when, 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, we're calibrating what did we use at the time? The metabolic cart for, Parvo Medics metabolic cart. And we're, doing the mod pod, we're calibrating that for 20 minutes. And so we had a lot of conversations with each other, and it's funny how it's a small world. They're good people. I love the Olettes.
Oh, I love Kristen. If you're listening or you listen to this,
incredible. And so, really there's been a long lineage of exercise physiologists that have stemmed. So if you think about like Philadelphia as the birthplace of America, you could really go back and say, well, Massachusetts was the birthplace of exercise physiology. And a lot of the sort of founding fathers, and you can't just say founding fathers because there was also a founding mother of ACSM called Josephine Rathburn. And ACSM every single year has a breakfast at the national meeting. Who Chris will remember, Dr. Volpe always had us getting up and going to 6 o'clock in the morning breakfast. Starts at 6 o'clock. So you got to be up at 5 to get there for 6.
Oh, yeah.
When you're traveling in a different city and you're in a hotel room, probably not sleeping as well, but it's very important. And most of I think there's 9 ACSM sort of faculty members that were putting together the American College of Sports Medicine. And I think 4 of the 9 all came from Springfield College. And so there's a long history of it, including Dr. Peter Karpovich, who came from the Harvard Fatigue Lab up in Boston. And so, Springfield College has always had a very long lineage. A lot of really renowned exercise physiologists have come out from there. They're more of a teaching institution now, I would say, than, major R1 type status, but like someone like Russ Pate, who's at the University of South Carolina, big physical activity epidemiology researcher, came out of Springfield. But Massachusetts has got a really good lineage of exercise science, exercise physiology, and physical education too. I think it's important to highlight physical education. And so that's sort of, go ahead.
If you want to talk about other small world stories about exercise physiologists from Massachusetts, my mentor, Dr. Sinclair Smith, as I was getting to know him, I found out that he used to work for the military for the USA RIEM, Environmental Medicine Research, as an exercise physiology researcher. And I said, hey, I used to live in Natick, Mass. And I would drive by it all the time. He goes, I used to live in Natick, Mass. And so there was somebody else in Philadelphia that we used to live in the same town, not at the same time, but we lived in very close proximity to one another.
Yeah, what's it about 20-25 minutes from Boston or so?
Yeah, it's only a handful of miles to the west of Boston, but that in Massachusetts that could take you a long time to drive. So yeah, could take you 20 minutes, it could take you an hour.
Yeah, and Usarium is a very important place because that's where it's called the United States Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine.
Yeah,
and so a lot of the knowledge that we know about environmental physiology and thermal gradients and all kinds of stuff, a lot of the work is done by people like Robert Kennefic and there's a lot of people that have come out of Usarium as well. So yeah, a lot of stuff is going on. It's close to New England, pretty large region from the ECSM. Chris,
there was also kind of as far as I know from looking back at the OG exercise literature, it seemed to me like Springfield and Harvard were in this arms race of sort with who could be the better exercise physiology research center. And what's interesting is, like you said, Springfield has more of a teaching institute now, but Harvard doesn't even have, as far as I know, they're not like specializing in exercise research, and they stopped doing it a while ago. I never
Right.
really heard why.
Well, the argument that one of my former mentors would say, Dr. Vince Pallone, and
Oh, I know him. Yep.
so he did his PhD at Temple here in Philly, small world.
Mhm.
His older brother is an OG of Temple University kinesiology program, and one of the things, so he used to tell us a story all the time, and he says that Springfield College closed down the Harvard Fatigue Lab. That would be his his philosophy behind it in terms of why that happened, because Peter Karpovich decided to come to Springfield College. There's pictures in the archives in the library of Springfield College about Peter Karpovich doing swimming trials and so really just some of that old historical data. If you go looking back at some of the yearbooks and some of the photos, it's really incredible how the field has changed over the last 60 plus years. And so
I don't know if this story is true, but I used to have a client who was a professor at Harvard, and he was very advanced in age. And he told me this story that Harvard had a closed calorimeter. So it was like a concrete room or apartment that people stayed in so they could gauge their energy expenditure.
Mhm.
And they didn't want it anymore. And Tufts wanted the lab, so they paid $1 for it. But the agreement was that they had to get it to Tufts. And so they had to fly it by helicopter, and it cost them like $1 million or something at the time.
Wow.
It was kind of odd. Now, I don't know if that story's true, but I hope it is, because I really like that story.
yeah. Interesting. I never knew that either. There's all kinds of little snippets of information I think that we all have, and
Well,
this Massachusetts and Philadelphia connection seems to be pretty strong in a lot of ways.
Well, hopefully in 10, 15 years, you guys will have a really famous podcast, and people will start going back to the early ones, and somebody
That's right.
will let you know.
Yeah.
You'll have like 20,000 comments, and somebody will figure it out.
That's right. Chris, when you were going through this process, I know that you said you decided to go through the rigorous National Strength and Conditioning Association. We've had some folks on the podcast. Some folks go the NSCA route. Some go the ACSM route. Some go sort of the self-education, sort of third-party organizations. What was it about NSCA? Was it because you had your athletic training degree and then you were at Bridgewater that was sort of recommended, or what made you say, I think NSCA is the certification that I want for this?
Well, at the time, so I didn't have a degree in athletic training. I ended up switching halfway through my undergrad to exercise. So I never pursued that. I would say that at the time, the idea was, if you wanted to be a fitness professional, there were some certifications that you could get, but the two that were good if you were going to have a degree were to get either the ACSM fitness specialist. I don't know if I'm saying the right name, but they're like their first personal training cert, because I know they have many, or you could get the NSCA CSCS. I'm not even sure if at the time if NSCA had its personal training cert. So I knew I wanted one or the other, and for lack of a better answer, it was probably out of convenience. Bridgewater State was hosting the CSCS test. So that's the one I decided to go with, even though I'm actually more active with the ACSM.
I remember asking you about, because I was like, oh, I want to get my personal trainer cert. What should I get it for? And you're like, well, I have the NSCA textbook, so that's what I started studying for.
Well, they had given, that was actually something Drexel had given me, because they were using it, or either they were using it or they were auditing it for a future class. So they were like, here, take this book. We know that you're NSCA. Tell us what you think. And so I let them know it was good. I liked the new version, but that was funny. I just had it kicking around, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do because of the pandemic. So I wasn't going anywhere either. So
Thank you for that. I tell you, I read like half that thing. It was just, I don't know, the information, and I just love learning about energy metabolism and all that kind of stuff. And pretty much like 90% of the info that was in that book, I just used for my exercise physiology class. I already had it all off the top of my head. was great.
Again, not to sound like an old man, but at the time you couldn't just go to a testing center and take whatever test you wanted. Now you could just go to one testing center and either take NASM or ACSM or,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, you could take any of them. At the time you had to actually go and travel to where the test was being held. And because it was already being held on campus, that it was most likely a decision of convenience.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. My personal history with like understanding the exercise kind of athletic training paradigm, performance-based, started when I was in the Army, and
Yep.
we had a couple athletic trainers that were CSCSs. And then from what I was told is when it comes to performance-based athletic training, your certified strength and conditioning specialist is like pretty much the peak when it comes to, right? And then ACSM kind of leads towards more like clinical rehabilitative type implementations of exercise.
Yeah, I mean, there was no doubt at the time. We knew that ACSM was the gold standard for testing, exercise testing, and it was also groundbreaking for health-related fitness.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like they didn't know about performance-related fitness, but the CSCS was definitely the one that you got if you wanted to focus more on performance exercise.
Yeah, that's kind of what I hope to do. I go to med school next year, as I was telling you before the podcast started. I'm really excited. I really want to specialize in physical med and rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
And then my idea is because we had a couple guests before, we were talking about goals of like losing weight or getting healthy. And I like to orient exercise goals to more, even if you're not like an athlete and won't function in any capacity as one, but having some sort of niche, like some sort of performance-based goal, I think is a great way to promote rehab and to promote health. What's your opinion on that?
No, I think that you're making some good points, but I don't even see that as a niche necessarily. It's more of just kind of like a focal point. It doesn't mean that you can't do the other things. It just means that it's something that you're more interested in focusing on. You can have one, you can have many. I think that they both come a long way too. I mean, we've all grown. I've seen ACSM branch out to many other certifications and to embrace performance exercise more. And I've also seen NSCA go the other way, where they have multiple certifications now, and they're now doing more in the what I would call the I don't know the right word for a general population, so to speak. I always felt like, even though after I was working with Fitness Together, there really wasn't an athletic performance focus on what I was doing, but I was able to use those to help motivate my clients who had more health-oriented fitness goals, if that makes sense. And so getting middle-aged women to try some powerlifting techniques, getting middle-aged men to try some dance techniques that I knew, trying to use some of the stuff from the performance world to enhance their general personal training workouts.
Yeah, I think it's more fun that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like I'm just trying to figure out how to execute this type of maneuver rather than, oh, I just need to work out for 30 minutes, you know?
I mean, just like you want to have your focus, they all have their focus too. I can throw NASM into the ring too and say what I think NASM does best is models for program design. Mm-hmm. And so they've taken a lot of what ACSM has come out with and a lot of what the NSCA does, and they've put it into kind of an easily understand set of models that your average personal trainer can utilize to their advantage, and then also riff off of and change up and kind of make their own style out of it.
I was going to just pull it. I actually have NASM. That was the first certification that I had. And it was largely, because I was in, similar situation. Like I got to support myself. And, but the big thing I think is really important is at the CPT level, they're all more similar than they are different, know, and it's really, for the longest time, some people that just say, well, I'm going to go down, I identify with the NSCA. I'm going to do everything, all the NSCA certs, because that's maybe you're a member, maybe you get discounts. There's multiple factors that why people choose to get certain certifications, right? But I think at the CPT level, a lot of folks they're more similar, like we said. And, but there is benefit. Do you see any concern with like third-party companies, not necessarily like NASM, because I think they probably lead the way when it comes to a non-NSCA, a non-ACSM organization that typically has a long track record of success for producing, certified personal trainers who can get jobs in commercial settings and even in athletic settings, and they have very good careers. What are your thoughts about, maybe some of the other sort of organizations that exist that come out and people do like weekend courses and, they might go that route, because NASM is it's going to take a few months for you to go through all that curriculum, take the test.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's not something where like you show up at a fitness center on a Saturday morning and then by Sunday afternoon you're a trainer. It's not like it's not like that in a lot of, so I do think they're organizing it rigorously, but I'm just interested in terms of like, because as you know, the industry's got all kinds of certifications, and that was the major reason why I wanted to ask you about NSCA. But whether or not you think, can some of those other certifications, does it do good? It's not, does it, what are your thoughts about those types of certs?
I think, well, the short answer is yes, there are a handful, maybe even more than a handful, that are legitimate and worthwhile, but it really comes down to yourself. And what I mean by that is what I like, I would never tell anybody you have to go with ACSM or NSCA and the heck with the rest. But what I think I would say is how much are you going to be self-disciplined in order to add to your skill set, right? And so something that might be a weekend may not be as best giving you a base of knowledge as one like ACSM that would take you longer to do. But if you're self-disciplined enough to learn on your own, then there's plenty of things you could also add to it. And so, the question I would get a lot from teaching students who are hoping to be a personal trainer at the occupational school, a lot of them were like, well, what do I want to get a job? Like, I just want to get a job. And it's kind of the wrong way to look at it. But what I would say to them is, if your goal is to just get a job, then you have to now do the work of targeting where you want to work and what do they want to see, right? And so if you do want to work for sports teams, it's going to be more attractive to have something more like the NSA. If you're going to go if you want to do some sort of medical fitness setting, then it's better to go with ACSM. And then after that, private companies like Fitness Together, they just look for something that is vetted. And usually the benchmark for vetting would be, I can't tell you what the acronym means, but it's the NCCA NACA certification. And so, not to sound too confusing, it's a body that certifies certification bodies, right? And so as long as they have that, then you should be okay for private sectors. It's really just about setting yourself up. The other thing I want to throw out there too is that they're pretty pricey. And what I could tell you is that there's nothing wrong with getting one that's in your price range that gets your foot in the door, and then later on moving up to one of the other ones if you feel there's value in it. I wouldn't say, I almost said one of the better ones, but I realize that's a biased way of saying it. If you feel there's value in another one, it doesn't hurt you to get one and then move to something else. So the other question typically comes up, should I have multiple certifications? And my answer is, there's nothing wrong with getting multiple certifications. I don't think that I would maintain multiple certifications, right? So I've had several throughout my time, but the only one that I've maintained is the CSCS, because to me, in an academic setting, that's also dealing with Paralympians and Olympians, that the CSCS worked better for me, and that the other ones weren't really adding much to that. Does that make sense? And so you can get a good handful of them and be well set, but you're not locked into that. It's not like you're not joining a team or an army, right? So if you sign up for ACSM and you feel like NSCA may be a better fit down the road, you can always let the ACSM one run out. It's not illegal. They're going to still let you go to their conferences. They're not going to be angry at you.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to what you value, and the kind of, and really, if you're trying to get a job in a certain space, what employers value. A few years ago, I was part of the Clinical Exercise Physiology Association when ACSM was deciding on whether or not, what are we going to do with the registered clinical exercise physiologist versus the clinical exercise physiologist. And then there's an exercise physiologist. And so what's the real distinction between a clinical exercise physiologist and a registered clinical exercise physiologist? And so really to get down, they were trying to figure out, well, what with redundancies in the certifications. And one, you could work in a clinical setting with a bachelor's prepared degree in having the clinical hours. And then the RCEP was master's degree plus clinical hours, right? And so a lot of folks who sort of went through the RCEP process, these are master's prepared people. They've put a lot of time and effort into the field. And the ACSM CCRB, which is a similar type of board that the college has in terms of question development, psychometricians, et cetera, they made the decision. They went back to a job task analysis, and employers found that over 80% of what was covered and what was credentialing people in the RCEP was being covered already at a bachelor's prepared level for a CEP. So that organization, CEPA, is really working to advocate for the profession of clinical exercise physiologists, but ACSF ended up sunsetting the RCEP program, the master's prepared program. So a lot of people who, pursued master's degrees, maybe even more recently, who had this degree, now they're some folks were questioning, why did I go get a master's degree? I took out loans for this, right? And I could have been doing the same thing, commanding a similar salary, perhaps with just a bachelor's, right? And so that sort of process has sort of played itself through. But the decision was ultimately to eliminate the redundancy. I think you're right, though. I think it comes down to what type of space are you looking to enter, and what are the employers in that space value people to have, whether it's years of experience and certification through strength and conditioning, or certification through ACSM, or certification through NASM. When I started working at Valley Total Fitness, it was NASM was completely fine to get me started, because I didn't have my bachelor's degree yet. I couldn't sit for the ACSM certifications yet, but it allowed me to get into the field and get some work experience that I feel that real world experience taught me a lot in life. And how to speak to people, how to, not be afraid to talk to people of different personality types, and really break out of my shell and build up confidence. And so, that really sort of, I feel, there is no right or wrong way to do it. And the college itself, ACSM National, has actually done a lot of collaborations where they've put on conferences in collaboration with each other, got speakers. And so it's good that it's sort of getting away a little bit from, at its core, these organizations have to protect their business model, right? And keep the lights on and so forth. But it's nice to see that they're sort of saying, well, one doesn't have to lose in order for someone else to win. It doesn't have to be the zero-sum game. And there are a lot more collaborations than ever before, which is, that gives me a lot of hope, I think, for the future in terms of where we're going with this field. So Nick, I know that, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is you wanted to ask Chris some questions about his research. And so his research track. Do you want to ask him a few questions?
Yeah. Chris, I remember when we were first talking, you were working on your dissertation and implementing exercise through gaming, and really avenues that is much less, I would say, I guess, aware of I'm going to exercise. It's more of an implementation of getting exercise. So what got you into that, and then how's it going?
Well, I think you're going to see a trend once you sit down, and again, you're going to see a trend as how I've made major decisions. What turned me on to the project I started at Drexel, that I'm actually still continuing with, is we were working on video games for children with disabilities, and it involved a lot of game development. And what I was doing in the research was interviewing children. And this story makes everyone laugh. The real inspiration for my project became a kid, one of the young men that we had in the study. I was interviewing him, and he liked the game he was playing. I said, "Do you like it?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I like it." And I was like, "Did you have fun?" He's like, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, if you had it at home, how much would you play it?" He goes, "I wouldn't play it at all." And I was shocked because he was giving me like these great answers, right? And then he's like, oh, no, I wouldn't play it at all. And I said, okay, well, why? He said, dude, have you seen Call of Duty? Like, this game doesn't even compare. And it's true, because they were doing pilot funding and they were doing the best game that they could, but it really wasn't at the point where, game budgets can dwarf movie budgets at this point. There's games that are $500-600 million to develop. And I said to him, so I asked a follow-up question off the cuff, and I said, if you could use the same movements that you just played this game with to play Call of Duty, would you? And he said, oh yeah, that would be great. I'd love it. And so that stuck in the back of my mind. Now, I was early in my PhD, so I wasn't at the point of doing a project yet.
Yeah.
It took a couple of years, and this thought had been in the back of my mind. And Dr. Sinclair Smith had challenged me to see what I could come up with for a dissertation. And I'll tell you this story. This is kind of funny. I started to get on this idea of, could we fool a sedentary video game into thinking that you're just hitting the buttons like you normally would, but you're actually moving? And that's important. A lot of people question, why that's even important, but a lot of games, especially at the time, had anti-cheat features or would lock you out of how you could map the controls. And so it was like a black box sort of thing, right? You didn't know how it was doing it, or you couldn't access it. At least I couldn't, because I don't have a technical background. Yeah. And so what I thought was there an easy way to just circumvent all that? Could we not have to get into the realm of game development? Could we use games that are already developed? The question that typically comes up from the logical, smart person at this point is, well, we have exercise video games. Why didn't you use them? And one of the issues is there just aren't many. There's very few in number compared to the number of video games that are released each year. And so even if you look at the literature in exercise video gaming over the past 5 or 6 years, it's still dominated by, say, the Nintendo Wii and the Xbox Kinect. Those are both discontinued. In fact, the Wii was discontinued in 2008. And so we're still using the Nintendo Wii in 2016 for studies on exergaming. When it was discontinued, you have to go on eBay or find a used one for sale in order to just buy it. And so I thought of, can we come up with something that's future-proof too, where we don't have to worry about new systems, new games. We just take something and simply add exercise to it. And then when that's out of style, when kids want to play something new or adults want to play something new, we can just apply it to that as well. And so when I started looking at what was out there for hardware, there wasn't much of anything. There had been a few things, and the other problem with this is that they're typically not financially sustainable. And so I hate to say this because it's what I'm focusing on right now, but exercise video games have been sort of a failure. We see a few creeping up now with VR. We see a few creeping up on the new Nintendo Switch. And I also thought at the same time, I knew that I was going to have to do an initial study that didn't focus on disability, but I was thinking ahead and thinking, I eventually want something that I can make inclusive too, that anybody could play regardless of what they were able to do and what they weren't. And so then when you get into things like even the new fitness game, we've been testing it in our lab, it has issues if you're in a wheelchair or sitting or can't stand. And then even some of the VR games that we've been playing that are exercise or dance based, there's a few issues that we haven't been able to address that make it, that introduce a barrier to play for someone with a disability. And I was saying this, and I actually bummed out one of our research assistants in our lab because he's like so passionate about this. And I said, this is basically recreating their disability virtually. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh man, that really bums me out because that is what it is, right? If you're not creating something that has enough options where you can make it inclusive, then now in a virtual world in which their disability has no meaning, all of a sudden you've given it meaning again. Yeah. And so I'm getting off on a tangent there. So what I was trying to do was figure out a way to future-proof it, cheaply put it together so that it wasn't like thousands of dollars of high-tech, proprietary gear, and then save myself the time of having to work with game development. And so I came up with a rudimentary way of doing it that involved a children's toy. And I took Play-Doh and a 2x4, and honest. I took a Play-Doh and I had like half a 2x4 and I brought it to Sinclair's office. And I put it on the board, and then I plugged the wires into it, and I hooked it up to my just basic laptop, and I had him play like a generic version of Guitar Hero when I built the controller right in front of him. And he was like, okay, he played it a little bit and he thought it was funny and he was laughing. He goes, I don't see where you're going with this. He wasn't annoyed because we used to meet for quite a long time. He wasn't trying to rush me, but he was like, where are you going with this? I don't really understand. And I said, okay, try it again. And I took the Play-Doh off the board and I set it all around the table. So you had to reach and lean in order to hit it. And then I had him try it again. And I was like, you're working a lot harder. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what if we did this? Think larger now. What if we did this so far away that you had to actually move around, you had to squat down, you had to reach up? And so what I was trying to do was to come up with a way that we could turn the basic hand controls into exercise controls. The other thing too that this addresses is, if you're young, I don't know if you remember the Wii, but it only took about 2 weeks of the Wii being out before people were posting videos on YouTube about how you could fool the controller. So you could sit on the couch and flick your wrist and play tennis, whereas it was originally designed to have like a lot of movement involved in it. Yep. And so it wasn't like, how do we force people to exercise, but can we come up with a way to encourage people to move around more and not think about initially right off the bat, how am I going to cheat this so I don't have to exercise?
Yeah.
And then the project took off from there. I also tested another system. So there was one of the things that was interesting about the Xbox Connect from an exercise standpoint was there was a whole community that came up around hacking may not be the right word because it usually makes people think of illegal activities, but people were trying to jailbreak and figure out ways to use the Connect other than to just play Xbox games that were designed to utilize the Connect, right? And so when they made the switch to, they had an adapter come out that you could use it with PCs, and all of a sudden there was this huge community and message boards, and I started to look at what they were saying. Most of them were engineers and technical people that I was having difficulty following what they were saying. But somebody at, I want to say it was UCLA, came out as part of like a pet project, a program, an app that you ran on your computer. And if you had the Connect connected to it, it would present you with a series of drop-down menus. And what you could do is define your own movements through drop-down menus. And then you could tell the computer what button to hit when it recognized it. Mm-hmm. And so for anybody listening, I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible. The drop-down menus were, you'd click a button and it would say what part of the body. So you could say left wrist. Then there'd be another drop-down menu and say, what are you looking for? And I would say left wrist directly to the left of the left shoulder by at least 16 inches, right? You might think, oh, that sounds weird. Why would you do that? I'm trying to get them to reach their arm way out to the side. So you're trying to visualize what the camera would have to see with all these points that it's collecting. So I knew it collected the shoulder, I knew it collected the wrist. So you could easily tell it once it got that far away and it was level at the same height, then you knew that they were putting their arm out rather than doing this or doing something else. And so the other part of my project was using a Connect with this hacking app that allowed me to just set whatever controls I wanted. And it wasn't even a video gaming app, to be honest. You could have it, you could set it up to type on Word if you wanted to, if you really wanted to move around that much. But I thought, well, what if we just assign it to the keys that you're already hitting to play the video game? So it's a really simple, the whole project was very simple and low tech means of getting to this, because what I wanted to focus on was more the exercise part. And so at Drexel, I measured, I had a healthy young population play it, and we measured their VO2, we measured their enjoyment, their perceived exertion, their self-efficacy. And we also, what's interesting is we looked at score, which, is an arbitrary thing, but we wanted to see, we knew that it was going to be harder to play. We wanted a way that we could assign a quantity to it, right? Because how do you assign difficulty of playing a game? Yeah. Right. And so we used a game, Pac-Man, that had a score, and we used the score as a proxy to represent their success, right? Because you have to be successful in the game to get a higher score. Mm-hmm. And what we were able to show in that study was that their scores were reduced by, 80%, sometimes 100% when they had to play it with exercise. But what was interesting is, from what we gathered from self-efficacy and their enjoyment, that it didn't really seem to affect their experience negatively. Oh. And so in a sense, we did present them with a game. We let them play it the original way that it was designed to, with hand controls. And then we said, okay, here's 2 different ways you're going to play with exercise. What do you think? And first of all, it was moderate to vigorous physical activity. So it was about 5 METs.
Oh, that's pretty good.
That was pretty good, yeah. By the by, there's a systematic review that was done on active video games. They typically elicit light to moderate physical activity. There's some that if you play long enough, game experience also factors into this. So if you get really good at Dance Dance Revolution, you could probably hit 7 or 8 METs. But we wanted to see the average person who wasn't exposed to this typically, what they would do. And we found it was about 4.5 METs, 5 METs. And so that was good.
Yeah.
Their RP matched it. So they were able to perceive their exertion. We weren't sure if you're playing a game, are you going to perceive it as hard as you probably should. And so that matched up pretty well. And then what's really, I mean, we always talk about non-significant findings not being very sexy or fun. But honestly, in this case, the fact that enjoyment didn't suffer was a really good finding for us because the scores did suffer. It was clear that they weren't able to play as well when you added exercise to the mix.
That's awesome.
Interesting.
Something as simple as Pac-Man, you get all these people who are enjoying it. You know,
Yep.
that's great. Wow.
Very cool.
So, what kind of stuff are you doing now?
Yeah. So the project that they were working on here at Rec Tech in Alabama was they had taken the Wii balance board and they had engineered it such so that it had a much bigger platform and they had people in wheelchairs able to wheel up onto it and they were able to play all of the Wii balance games and it was pretty successful. And so about the time that I met them, they had an engineering team making their own because again, Wii's discontinued. They wanted to see if they could come up with their own way of doing something similar. And so what they were doing here is, any of you listening, it's really cool if you check it out. Microsoft released what's called a Microsoft Adaptive Controller called the Mac. And it actually looks, I mean, I'm putting my hands up. It's probably a foot wide by about 6 inches tall. And it looks like an old school Nintendo controller. It has a big cross on it and it has 2 big buttons. But along the top and the sides, it has ports for just about everything. And so what it's designed for is you can buy assistive and adaptive tech from third-party companies and plug it in and then map it to whatever you want. And so for instance, if you had an amputation of one arm, you could buy a single hand controller and plug it into the Mac and play your games that way. If you used a blow tube, you could use a blow tube to play the game. You could use just about anything that is made and plug it into this. So it's more of a hub than an actual controller. And so what they were doing was they designed their own balance board that acted like a joystick, but it was much larger, had a much larger footprint, and it also has parallel bars. And so individuals with limited mobility can play it. If you use crutches like I do or use a walker, you can get into this and hold on to the parallel bars and lean to play the game. And you can wheel into it on your wheelchair and lean to play the game. And then it's inclusive. You could come to our lab and play the game by just standing on it. So that's the thing too, is we don't want it. I don't like to use the word cater. We don't cater to people with disabilities. We're trying to make it inclusive so everybody can do it.
Yeah.
We're not really interested in coming up with something that only just people with a disability are going to use. We want it to be fun. We want people to play together. We don't want them to worry about whether they have a disability or not in order to participate. So that was the project they were working on. I joined that project, and I also reiterated my my touchpad, so to speak. I reiterated it so people could play it from their wheelchair or sitting or standing, because the one at Drexel was standing. I used a healthy population. So we came here and we reiterated it over the summer and we tested that out, and it turns out it's pretty usable. And we didn't measure any exercise variables except RP. And right now it looks like it's akin to what we've seen with other exercise games with light to moderate physical activity. And then I'm happy to announce that I just got my first grant ever. So I got my first grant on my own. I got a pilot grant in which I'm working with a few engineer faculty here, and they're going to reiterate my device to be improved in a few ways. Like for instance, we're going to feed my device into the Microsoft Adaptive Controller. So it could be one of the other things that's used with it. And then once all the revisions and improvements are made, I'm going to test it for VO2. We're going to do a pretty traditional exercise study with it to see what kind of MET levels we can elicit with it. And it's going to be all individuals. This new iteration is going to be all individuals that have a disability that limits their mobility, and they typically sit. But they can use any of their assistive tech too. So they can use their own wheelchair. They can use their own chair. We can put a chair in there. There's so many different things we can do with it. So that's one of the projects we're working on right now. And then we do other things. So our lab typically does any type of research or development project for increasing opportunities or enhancing them. And so some of our projects aren't physical, they're web-based. And so we're working on a tele-exercise platform through the Lakeshore Foundation that they're, so there's been a few, I don't want to, occlusive gym is the right word to use, like Lakeshore Foundation, that have decided to reach out to people around the country by having like an online platform for exercise. And so we rolled that out at the beginning of my postdoc, and we're working through that, and people are using it, and we're interviewing them, and they're giving us feedback on what they want to see. But they can actually attend inclusive fitness classes live through Zoom.
Incredible.
So
That's
seated yoga, seated Zumba, all kinds of different things. So that's another project we're working on. We have a couple of things with universal design. And so I should mention that we're not just quantitative, which is interesting for an exercise lab. We do a lot of mixed methods and qualitative as well. And so we have a focus group study coming up on universal design for fitness facilities specifically. And then we're about to release a website that we're going to test. And we want this to be nationwide too, where it's going to act as a Yelp system. So think of Yelp, and people they call it crowdsourcing reviews, right? So if you want to know where to go to eat, you go into Yelp or Google reviews and put in a restaurant, and hundreds of people come up and they tell you about it. Well, we want to do the same thing, but we want it to be for community physical activity for individuals with varying levels of ability. And so what would it allow you to do is, instead of just searching for restaurants, for instance, you could search for anything that had to do with sports, wellness, fitness, exercise, but you could filter it by different levels of accessibility. So I also use a walker, and it'll filter the results based on your needs. And so one of the things we're trying to do is to see the best way to do that. Like, what do individuals want to see when they go on? How will they be able to interpret it? For instance, before I got there, our team did a study where they wanted to see all of the aspects of accessibility for a sports fitness exercise place. They did a really good comprehensive study, but the questionnaire is over 250 questions. And so what we're hoping for this website is that people at the facilities themselves, or individuals that visit these facilities, go online and give it a review just like Yelp. But we want some sort of easy interface for them to fill out. We don't want them to answer a 250 question accessibility survey. And we also, there is a point to universal design where businesses can be hesitant when you start talking about accessibility, because they think you're targeting them to sue them. And what we want to do is change that stigma where, hey, we want you to increase your business. We want you to put out there how inclusive you are. You can go on here and rate yourself, and it's very easy. It's very quick to do. It's just a few number of questions, and we can get to the basic needs of individuals with limited mobility. And so that's one of the other projects we're doing. So it's an interesting mix. We have some physical projects going on, and then we also have a mix of virtual remote projects going on as well.
So cool. I'm just amazed. That's awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Very cool. Very cool. So as we're finishing up for today, Chris, I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about sort of nice transition point, to talk a little bit about one of the studies that you have ongoing and that you're looking for some participants nationwide. You want to talk about that?
Sure. You're going to see me being rude on my phone, but I'm making sure I get the date right, because I can put it right on here that it's actually upcoming. So what we have going on is a study, making sure I get the right date here. Yeah, okay. So on April 13th, about a little over a month away, we're going to have a focus group in which we are going to have individuals who work in a fitness, wellness, sports, anything having to do with physical activity. If they work in a facility full-time and they've been working there for at least 6 months, we'd like them to participate in our focus group. And what we're going to do is we're going to send you 2 things in advance to read. And so one is going to be this short survey that I just mentioned. So for this project, we took that 250 question survey and we shortened it down so it's real fast to do. And we want to know what people think. And so we have focus groups that are going to be individuals with a disability, but we also have this focus group designed for fitness professionals because we want to see what they think. And so we're looking for about 8 to 10 people to attend this focus group. And we want it to be nationwide. That's why I wanted to announce it here. We're not doing local recruitment for this because we want people from different parts of the country to give us their feedback. And you can tell us it's awful. We want to know how to make it better for both the end user, but also for the people that work at these facilities that want to encourage someone with a disability to come and work out. And so we want to know how that is. And then we're also going to supply you with the scoring system that we plan on using too. It's a very simple 5 tiers where it goes up on how many accessible features you have. It's not like, here's the point at which you should get sued or anything like that. It's basically like, at what point would certain people want to make the decision on whether they can come and participate along with you. And so we're looking for that. Obviously that is coming up pretty soon. So individuals can reach out to me in my email. You can put it in the description if you want, but I can say it here. It's Christen JM. It's my first name and then my middle and last initial @uab.edu, and we can get you signed up. We're only running one focus group for fitness professionals, so it'll be on April 15th in the afternoon. If you're interested, let me know. Or if you have questions, just reach out to me and ask me, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure that we put all this into our show notes,
Yes.
Chris, and April 13th, looking between 8 to 10 people. I have your email
It's
address
remote.
written down.
It's through Zoom. You don't have to be in Alabama. You don't have to come out here to do it. It's just a Zoom focus group. That's all. Pretty
Very
easy.
cool. Very cool.
And you are
Well,
compensated, so there's a compensation available as well.
That's always helpful.
Nice.
I should mention that. If I don't say that and they listen here, they're going to say, Chris, why didn't you mention that?
It's helpful for, those folks that are trying to support themselves.
Yeah.
Full circle. Well, Chris, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and some of the very good work that you're doing. And it's nice to hear some of the historical background that you've had both in Massachusetts, here at Drexel, and now at Lakeshore. So incredible. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to us or to Christian directly. Make sure that we give that his information into everything. And thanks so much for being here, and hope everybody has a good day.
It's
Thanks,
my
guys.
pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to
All
you
right, bye.
soon. Bye-bye, everybody.